next big area that we're going to pursue as a country in the area of finance on the banking committee is going to be housing finance, I think. And obviously, not much is going to happen this year. Matter of fact, nothing will happen this year. There may be a few bits and pieces. There are bills that continue to come along. I think Menendez and Boxer have a bill that may make it to the floor sometime soon. Again, just sort of dealing with some of the edges of the existing crisis that we have. And so what we've been doing in our office is trying to build towards a real bill, knowing that, again, this year is going to be a year of education. And I look around this room, and a lot of you have been in our offices helping us with that. I think one of the things that we've all learned from this last crisis is while there may be a role for government in a utility aspect or in a utility aspect as it relates to housing, what you don't want government doing is juicing up housing. As was mentioned in my introduction, I spent a lifetime building shopping centers around the country and owning real estate and developing commercial real estate. After going on a mission trip to Haiti, I came back and started working in the inner city and did create an organization, a nonprofit. It was a civic endeavor. It was not business, that helped about 10,000 families in my community have decent, fit, and affordable housing. And so I find myself in a very different place here where, on that end of the spectrum, obviously, as an advocate, you're trying to create ways for people to be able to afford housing. You're trying to create an environment and an opportunity for them to do it. On this end of the spectrum, after going through the bubble we've gone through, you realize that, government can get way involved in these things and juice things up. And I think we realized that government really had no ability to price the actual risk that was taking place through the guarantee fee. So what we've endeavored to do over the course of the last period of time, first of all, I see Courtney Godal sitting in the back, who seems to be continually making news after she's left our office. But she was obviously more involved in the center, the main banking world prior to being on our staff. One of the things we did was went out and found somebody who had spent a lot of time in housing finance, and that's Michael Bright, who's standing, leaning up against the back wall. Michael's been with numbers of failed entities around the country. I'm kidding. Has learned a great deal from those experiences and has brought them to our office. But one of the things that, I say that in jest, he's obviously a very successful young man. But one of the things that we know is that the private sector is on strike. I look around this room, and so many of you have been in meetings where we've sat down to try to understand what it would take to bring the private sector back into the purchase of housing securities. The fact is that all of you know this, more than 9 out of 10 loans that are being made today are being made with some type of federal guarantee. I think everybody in the country on either side of the aisle realizes that's not a very healthy place for us to be. And so what can we do to bring the private sector back in? And obviously, I know the private sector would like to have transparency. The private sector would like to have reps and warranties that were actually honored. The private sector would like to be able to look at zip codes and understand the types of underwriting that has taken place. There are a lot of things that we know. You want a TBA market that you can really count on. So what we've done is crafted a bill that we think does two things. Number one, it brings the private sector back in by doing some of the things that all of you want to see happen. I mean, let's face it, you guys are the folks that actually make the housing market work when it's functioning in its proper way. And at the same time, lessen our dependence on the GSEs. One of the things we've gone back and looked at, and we've got anywhere from $160 to $200 billion in losses right now at Fannie and Freddie. If you look at the size of their portfolios, and you had just a 7% shared risk. In other words, there were private sector entities on the front end of those transactions. The U.S. taxpayers would have lost no money in this last debacle. No money. And what we've done over the course of this year and sitting down and meeting with many of you, we've also sat down and spent a lot of time with people in the multifamily arena where they actually have a private sector component that is in a first loss position. And what that does is obviously create a buffer, but also create some discipline in the process that the single-family piece does not have. What our bill currently does is, over a 10-year period, it takes our reliance on the GSE guarantees from 100% today of each loan that is originated down to 90, down to 80, down to 70, 10% each year over time, to where that reliance is down to zero. Again, we understand if we just got down to 10% during this last debacle, the taxpayers would not have been at risk at all. So what we're doing is we're continuing to meet with people on the other side of the aisle. We're getting ready to come out. I would say that our last bill is version 1.0. And sitting down and meeting with intelligent people like you, and candidly entering meetings like this where intelligent questions are asked. We're getting ready to come out with version 2.0, which will have some differing characteristics. We may employ something like credit-linked notes, or do something where there is a true first loss position and not a shared loss position, to really make it easier for these bonds to be more liquid than if you actually had a shared risk type of situation, which makes them less liquid. All of these things are things that we're learning from you and learning from other people across the country. Our goal is not to drive some kind of ideological bent in our housing finance arena. Our goal is to create a mechanism that works, where it's driven by private sector incentives, where we have a highly liquid market that continues to work for the American people, that's not juiced up by government policy so that you, without even knowing that you're doing so, you create the kind of bubbles that we did during this last rising. So we're going to come out with another version. My guess is it'll be the second of 3 or 4 versions that come out before it's actually showtime or game time, which will be after this November election. But for what it's worth, I think we're going to end up in a place over time that works for our country, works for the private sector, who we rely upon, and keeps our country from being in the kind of situation today where we're totally reliant on GSEs. The taxpayers are at tremendous loss, and we have all types of policymakers that have their hands in driving something that's become like a plaything to them, and that's what the GSEs actually are today. I mean, they're mechanisms where policymakers can make things happen without passing legislation. I want to close with this and take questions. I really applaud what Ed DeMarco is doing at FHFA. And, you know, if you really look at what's happening, he's become a whipping boy, candidly, for both sides of the aisle. We applaud the steps that he's taken and the pilots that he is putting in place. As a matter of fact, we think what he's doing greatly mirrors the first bill that we've put out in trying to develop this shared risk model. And if you develop, quote, a shared risk model and not a first loss model, what it really gives you the opportunity to do as you're moving down the road and as we're really developing the kind of housing policy and the kind of reforms that need to take place, what you're really doing is you're developing the ability to actually price what the guarantee fee ought to be, because basically that upper portion driven by guys like you that are taking that shared risk position, what you're doing is giving signals to the market as to what that guarantee fee is really worth. So we applaud his efforts. It's not that we're trying to carry his water, but we really think that he's done his best to try to protect the American taxpayers. We think he's putting in place some reforms that we think may well work and lead the way towards other types of reforms that we think will be healthy for our country. And candidly, again, both sides of the aisle are taking shots at him. I think it's laughable, because what's really the reason people are beating up on Ed DeMarco is Congress hadn't had the conviction, the will, the desire, or whatever to really take up housing reform. Things aren't working quite the way people would like for them to work in America today. And so what does Congress do? Congress finds someone to beat up on to really cast the blame and move it aside. Look, it's our responsibility. We should have done it. We should have done it when we were passing other types of financial reforms in our country. We should have done it then. We didn't do it then, but it's our hope that over the course of this year, as we continue to educate folks, as we continue to deal with people who, you know, candidly in the Senate today, I would say there's not more than 3 senators max that are putting any effort at all into housing reform. And so, you know, the process to really make something good happen is you've got to start sitting down with folks, expanding your base. People like you need to come in, which we're going to be organizing these types of meetings so that senators have the kind of uptake that they need to really weigh in on bills like this. And then we've got to develop a consensus, candidly, that people that Democrats and Republicans both can buy off on and sell to their constituencies back home. So that's the process we're involved in. I don't think I made any news today. I apologize. Fortunately, everybody's still awake, and I'd be glad to take any questions or comments. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, my name's Michelle Hirsch. I'm a reporter from the Fiscal Times.
I can't hear you.
Oh, do I need to press something? My name's Michelle Hirsch. I'm a reporter from the Fiscal Times. It seemed like most of your discussion was focusing on the future of how to restructure the housing finance system, but
Right.
I just wanted to ask your opinion on the current state of things. We saw some pretty good data last week on housing starts, and
Yeah.
we're expecting to see some more today on existing home sales.
Yeah.
You know, you're focusing very much on the future, but is it your opinion that, you know, we are out of the woods and that the housing market is basically coming out of the woods at this point enough to
Yeah.
focus on the future?
Well, I definitely think we need to quit fiddling. I mean, I think every time we try some new process, I mean, what happens is, first of all, many of them are vague, and people are sitting on the sidelines to see what the outcome really is. And I think we've done more damage, candidly, over the course of the last year or so than we've helped. I mean, I look at things like the distortions that were created by the AG settlement. I mean, you know, everybody, you know, comes out and beats their chest over this $26 billion settlement. They don't realize that the servicers, these major institutions around the country, that, by the way, there's a lot of anger towards, they don't realize these major institutions get a 45 cents credit for every dollar they cram you guys down. Okay, it's not their money, it's your money, or actually it's not your money, it's my 401k money or somebody else's pension money. And so, you know, what we've done is further move the private sector out. I mean, they don't understand what in the world the lay of the land is going to be down the road. We've kind of changed the whole relationship between a second mortgage and a first mortgage. We've dealt with them on a pro rata basis, which is most unusual. And of course, the fact of the matter is the servicers who are getting credit for cramming you guys down, and which is really me down and every other American down that has a pension of some type, or a 401k, I should say, they in many cases are the guys that have the second mortgage, okay, and are being treated in a very fair way. So look, I think we've created a lot of distortions. I think we need to stop fiddling, okay? I think the very best thing we could do for the housing market is for Congress, you guys are on strike, is for Congress to go on strike for a while as it relates to passing any more pieces of legislation to try to get, quote, the housing industry out of the woods. That's the best thing, in my opinion, we could possibly do.
Andrew Jacobowitz with Enterprise Community Partners, also affordable housing nonprofit. You mentioned that...
Are you the entity that Bart Harvey used to...
Yes.
Yeah, well, Jim Rouse was like one of my heroes in life, and I probably wouldn't be standing up here if it weren't for my association with the Enterprise Foundation years ago.
So you mentioned that the 7% shared risk would have eliminated pretty much all the taxpayer losses potentially. Right. Yet you're proposing 10% per annum over the course of the next 10 years, and certainly sort of incremental change is probably better than wholesale change for stability of the markets in general, both on the owner's side as well as the secondary mortgage markets. But what's the rationale for eliminating or ratcheting back entirely if 10 or even 20% first loss would have eliminated any taxpayer risk?
So the way you make things happen up here in Washington is you drive a stake in the ground, okay? And you start off in a position, and you work towards a place where you can build some consensus. And I think you're going to see more of that taking place in our 2.0 bill. We realize it's not prime time yet. We're trying to show that we believe, and by the way, I really believe this for what it's worth. I know Bart Harvey, your most recent CEO, is on the board of either Fannie or Freddie and has been in our offices recently telling us how outstanding both organizations are and how they're getting ready to make a ton of money, okay? That'll be interesting to see, and maybe it's the case. And I realize the tranche of loans they're doing right now are obviously better than the ones they made before. But, you know, in order to make something happen here that's healthy, I think you start out with the premise that we fully believe that you could really make the housing sector work, I believe this, without having these entities. We realize that's a place that I don't think we're going to have these entities, by the way, at least not in the form they're in. But I think, you know, we realize that in order to build consensus and to do something that's great for our nation, we're going to be working back in a different direction. Yes, sir.
Adam LaViere, I work for Milstein & Co. You mentioned fiddling in Congress potentially distorting the housing market over the course of the last year. There was what some view in the market as a mortgage tax that was passed as a pay-for the extension bill that came through Congress late last year. Do you think that there's a risk of either FHA or Fannie or Freddie needing to increase their guarantee fees in the near term in order to pay for other congressional actions this year?
Well, Congress, I mean, look, I go back and say, look, these two entities have been honeypots, right? I mean, for all kinds of things, and that's why we end up in places like we're in. It was unbelievable to me that to pass a payroll tax, that Congress would add a guarantee fee for the next 10 years, okay, on every mortgage transaction that goes through these entities. You pass an increase in the guarantee fee to pay for 10 years, to take 10 years to pay for a 2-month extension of the payroll due. And what happens in the process, you're artificially driving up guarantee fees, not based on any kind of science or anything. By the way, guarantee fees have been too low. But, so, I mean, I'm not going to, they've been too low, but if you're going to have a guarantee fee increase, it seems to me that what you'd want to do is use that for the desired purpose of what it was created for, right? And that is to make these institutions more healthy. So as long as you've got these $5 trillion behemoths out there, Congress is going to do devilish things. I mean, this is idiotic what we did. Idiotic. Total idiocy, okay? So let me tell you what you do now. In order to change Fannie and Freddie over time, now because you've created this 10-year situation where now these guarantee fees over 10 years are paying for 2 months worth of payroll tax extension, now you've got to come up with a pay-for to make changes. I mean, it's total idiocy and speaks to the reason why you don't want to have organizations like this that Congress can fiddle with and play with and basically keep us from making the kind of tough decisions that we need to make. Yes, sir.
Senator Jim Milstein, aren't you concerned, I mean, your approach to the restructuring of Fannie and Freddie with the 10% reduction every year, aren't you concerned that that leaves them in conservatorship in perpetuity over that period of time, and exactly the risk that you decry of using them as a honeypot? As long as they're in conservatorship, they remain at risk of being used as a honeypot.
Yeah, I think in discussions with most of you and our counterparts on the Hill, I think people realize that once you get to a certain point, it's almost irrelevant, isn't it? I mean, once you get down if you get down to a level of 60 or 70%, you might as well not really be there, right? Because the risk, in other words, you've really taken away all risk, and then you're able to move, hopefully, into a very different mode. But, you know, we do have, in our 2.0 version, there's no question that one of the details that needs to be added is ending their charters. and basically, we realize that you've got 30-year mortgages that over time have got to basically burn off over time, and those little intricacies we're going to try to work out with our 2.0 version. Yeah. Yes, sir.
We'll have to make this the last question.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, my name is Jim Viterillo. I'm a housing specialist with GAO. Been studying the private sector and Ginnie Mae's for quite some time. So the perplexing question to me, and is that I've never read your bill, is what role, if any...
Well, you're just like everybody else in the Senate.
Okay. Fine. I'll try to get it.
Is there a race you could actually enter this year? So.
No, I stay away from politics. No, I'm strictly a research geek. So my question to you is, do you foresee any role at all for the federal government to regulate a future privatized market? Because in the past market, there really was no regulation at all at the federal level, or very, very, very little. So is there kind of a balance sort of in between where you might have some kind of effective checks and balances between the two to make sure one doesn't dominate the other?
Yeah, I mean, I think, sure. I think there should be appropriate balance. I think, again, you look at, yes. So the answer is yes.
Is that in your bill?
There's numbers of things already in Dodd-Frank that deal with housing finance.
Not on this.
Well, I tell you what I'd love to do. I don't want to make the bill a Christmas tree, okay, which we do often in Washington, but I would like to sit down with folks like you who have concerns about what ought to do that. I mean, seriously, we're not. I didn't come to Washington to drive some ideological bent. I just want to solve problems. I will say this: there are some things in Dodd-Frank, and I'll give you an example of something that, again, I think is even more distortive, and it's something called the qualified mortgage. And the Consumer Protection Agency is right now trying to decide where those who originate loans, whether they can check the box and go through appropriate procedures and have FICO scores and debt to loans and real incomes and jobs and all those kind of things. But if the originator makes the loan and 18 years later the loan goes bad, they want to use a rebuttable presumption standard. At least they're debating that, where they're saying that all of you should have known better. Not you, but the people who actually made the loan. You should have known better. You should have known 18 years ago that this guy was not going to be able to repay the loan. I think that's going to have a negative effect. And we're trying to push hard. I think even our HUD secretary understands that might create a little bit of a problem. But, those are the kind of things we don't want to do, probably. But, look, come to our office.
QRM, too.
Well, the qualified residential mortgage, I'll never forget. We it's ended up, I almost laugh about it if it wasn't so bad. But, while it was being debated on the floor, we had an amendment that said, look, why don't we just say that the minimum down payment has to be 5%? Why don't we do that? And I don't know if you remember, the famous quote was, well, if you did that, then only those people who could afford loans would be able to buy houses. And so now we've ended up with this qualified mortgage, which is, I guess they're contemplating a 20% down payment. QRM, excuse me, and with a 20% down payment. Anyway, it's early in the morning. Y'all have a great day. Thanks for letting me come, okay?
Senator, thank you very much, and let me invite you back to talk about 2.0 and 3.0 when it's ready.
I think showtime will be around next spring, and what I would do if I were all of you, I look around the room and I see many of you on the Hill often. I really would do the best that I could in a very surgical way to talk with members on both sides of the aisle on the banking committees in both the House and Senate, but to really talk with them about what needs to happen. The uptake on housing finance is really low. It really is. You'd think it would be one of the most simplistic forms of lending. I mean, you got a single family home and you got somebody living in it, you got collateral, you got all those kind of things. But it's obviously one of the most complex, and I applaud y'all coming today and listening to a very boring presentation, but even more so, I would applaud y'all coming into various offices and making sure people are hearing your concerns. We're going to try to address those in an appropriate way, and hopefully in the process do something really good for our country. Okay? Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
That was really terrific.
Thank you.